Hello, it's Charlene Lee here, and I'm going to be talking today about beliefs. What are the beliefs that you hold in your organization, or the beliefs that you say to yourself that are holding you back from change, from being disruptive? So, today I'm going to be talking about how important beliefs are because they are the things that we wake up with in the morning, we go to work every day, and we tackle the difficult challenges ahead of us based on how we believe the world works. So, one of the things I have found in my research and my work with organizations around disruptive change is that it's rarely the technology. And I'm saying this as a technologist that it's not about the technology, it's really about the people and the beliefs that people have about what they are capable of. And if there's anything that the recent coronavirus has had, this pandemic has really shown us, I believe, is that our ability to take on challenges, to be disruptive, are much, much higher. We are able and capable of enduring so much more than we ever thought possible. We could transform so fast in just a few weeks that we thought it would have taken years. And so all those beliefs of how things used to work or could work were just blown out of the water. And we've proven those beliefs to be wrong. And so I think this is a great time to be thinking about what are the beliefs that are holding you back, that you still hold to be true, that you need to be letting go of. So I want to welcome anybody who may be joining today and just say where you're coming from. And then also share what are the beliefs that you think are holding you back? What are the things that you say to yourselves or that your organization says that are holding you back? So one of the things that I often hear, I'll just go through a couple of the beliefs that I have seen. One is that people will say, well, this is the way we've always done things. There's no reason for us to have to change because it's always worked in the past. It's going to continue working in the future. Another belief that I hear oftentimes is, it's not my job. This is not my battle to fight. That's somebody else over there. It's somebody else in innovation or in strategy. It's their job to be thinking about change in the future. It's not my job. I keep my head down and do my job. I'll get in trouble if I don't do that. Another belief I hear oftentimes is I don't have permission. I really would love to make this change happen, but I don't have permission to do that. And when I ask them, well, who would you get permission from? They go, well, I don't know. It's not clear who actually would call the shots, but it's probably one of those guys over there. And it's always those guys somewhere else over there, not necessarily you and that person. And then I also hear oftentimes that things need to be perfect. Decisions need to be perfect. Actions need to be perfect because we can't take the risk of having things go wrong. And then finally, that consensus is required to move forward. Everybody has to agree. We can't afford to have a single person not agreeing with us. So I think one of the biggest issues that we face is all of these beliefs that are holding us back versus moving us forward. So what I'd like to do instead is to identify the beliefs that are common amongst disruptive organizations. And in particular, what are the things that they are doing that make it possible for them to be disruptive, to be able to embrace change constantly, all the time, every day? So if you're listening, I would love you to just chime in, to identify yourself, say hello. I'd love to say hello back. And then also share with me where you're coming from today. And also, what are some of the beliefs that are holding you back, you and your organization back? So let's talk a little bit about what are some of the beliefs that I find that are common around what I call flux organizations and flux cultures. And the reason why I think this is so important is that if you're in what I call a stuck culture and you want to be capable of handling more flux, then if you want to change your culture, then the fundamental things you have to change are your beliefs and your behaviors. And let's start with the beliefs. Because what I find with disruptive organizations is that there are three beliefs that they hold to be true. The first one is openness. The second is agency. And the third is a bias for action. These three beliefs, openness, agency, and action, are what make organizations so capable of not just creating disruption once, but being able to do it over and over again. So one of the reasons is that openness is the first and most important belief that we believe is out there, because openness is the foundation of being able to say that we can use information and decision-making openness to create a foundation of trust. So one of these things is being able to see information flow up and down throughout the organization. And then also that decision-making is open. So one of the examples I'd like to have is that from Nokia, one of the things they did as they were going through a huge amount of change a few years ago was they were really tackling the whole issue of moving away from mobile phones. They had fallen so far behind with their Symbian platform behind Apple iOS and Android that there was no way for them to catch up. And so Risto Silasman, the chairman who took over, came from a tech background, came from a startup background, and said, we've got to do things differently. And what he said was, when the worst possible outcome could be talked about, it actually removes the fear, and then we can plan and prepare ourselves. And so he really removed these barriers about being open about how things were going. The biggest problem was they weren't being truthful and honest about how bad the situation was. And when they could actually see how bad things were, they were then able to start addressing what those issues were. And he has this great saying, and I just thought I'd put it up here, which is, no news is bad news is good news, and good news is no news. So think about this. If there's good news, okay, great, things are going as we thought. That's what we expected. Well, bad news is actually really good news, because now we can then address what that problem was. Thank goodness we have this bad news, so now we can address it and keep things from getting worse. And no news is the worst, because you really don't know what's going on. So I love this philosophy that Risto put out there. And I think one of the biggest things that we can do as organizations is to have this openness belief. Because when we have it, what happens is you start creating a foundation of trust. And that's when you can create accountability, we can force difficult conversations, remove the fear of failure, and also create opportunities for different and diverse opinions to filter up through the organization. So here are 3 ways to identify ways to create more openness in your culture and increase the openness belief. The first one is to identify crucial places where trust is an issue, and then address those areas with more openness. And that means sharing more information with them. It may mean making clear how decisions are being made, who's making those decisions, so that there's greater trust in how that process works. The second one is to put actual data and information in the hands of people who can best use it. So if those people are at the front lines, then why are we hoarding the information at the very top of the organization? Sure, we as the executives and the VPs may know what's going on in the marketplace, but do we trust the people at the front lines to be able to use that information to do their jobs better? So put that information there. And then the last area is to really measure how openness is happening, is if it's taking place in your organization, and in particular, measure trust. One example of this is to ask people, how comfortable are you talking to your boss's boss? Because when we have openness and trust and accountability, we feel that we can move up and down and throughout hierarchies without any penalties, that there is a spirit of openness, that we're trying to pull in the same direction. We're all trying to accomplish the same thing. And that if you see something, you can say something. So I want to take a moment and just welcome some of the people here. Fernanda, thank you so much for joining from Sao Paulo. It's great to be able to have you here. And I love this belief that you're sharing. So I'm going to just share this here. I think that what makes me afraid to change is not feeling an important piece of the company. And I think that's such an important point to make, in that if you don't feel like you are connected to the purpose of the organization, if you do not feel like you have a role to play, then you're going to believe that you can't make a difference. And so why even push yourself out there to make that change? Lisa, great to see you here. Thank you for the shout out. I'm gonna not say this name correctly. Azura Din. is one of the beliefs he says is it really thinks that there are some better times ahead. The key is not to be upset. Joyes, thank you so much for joining us. Milind, thank you for joining from India. It's really late there, so thank you for joining. And Ahmed coming in from Algeria too as well. So thank you so much for joining. And again, share with us, what are the beliefs that are holding you back? Because I think this is a place where we can hear from each other too, to realize that we're not alone in thinking about these issues. The second one I want to point out too is what Fernanda pointed out, which is the sense of I don't have a role to play, and that is the sense of and this belief of agency. Agency is when you are given permission to act like owners. You are expected to act like an owner of the business. It doesn't matter how big the business is, if it's a small group of people or a conglomerate of hundreds of thousands of people, you feel like you have the ability to be able to make decisions and be responsible and be accountable for them too as well. What I love about this idea is that it's not about waiting for your boss or your manager to give you permission. You already have it. It's not about empowerment, where you're waiting for someone to empower you with the ability to make decisions. Agency says you already have that ability to act on your behalf. You have all the information, the tools, and the resources available. And it's also a two-way street, that if you're given the responsibility to take action, then you also have to own the accountability of it. And when this happens, what happens is that you're demonstrating, in fact, the fact that you're trusting people to make these decisions. You don't have a situation where people say, it's not my job anymore to make these changes happen. It is my job. I see it as an imperative that I have to do this. And also when people have agency, they take into account what the impact will be of their actions on customers and on their colleagues and team members. And lastly, when you have agency, you're not only thinking about just what's happening today, you're also taking into account what's going to happen in the future. What are future considerations or needs that we have to take into account? So I love this idea of agency because it reduces so many of the problems that we have inside of organizations. In that if we had a stronger belief of agency, those issues around like, I don't have permission, or what happens if we fail, or it's not my job, those beliefs go away. So one of my favorite examples of this is from Amazon. So one of their leadership principles is disagree and commit. And what it says is that you have a responsibility as a leader, and frankly, they think of every person in the organization as a leader, to come to the table with all of your best ideas and to fight for those ideas, own those ideas, and really believe that they're going to be the right move for your customers. And then at the end of the day, when the decisions are made, when it's very clear that this decision is going to be X and not Y, then everybody has to commit, even if that was diametrically opposed to the decision, the action that you wanted to have. So this is a really unique quality of agency because it says we're going to make sure that everyone has a voice, but we're also going to have this openness of a process. We're going to have openness of information and sharing because there's trust to create this ability to create commitment to as well. So if you don't have a strong sense and belief of agency in the organization, there are a couple things that you can do, especially if you're the leader of an organization and you're trying to create a sense of agency amongst your team members. First of all, demonstrate to them that you trust their judgment, that when they have a decision, you go, I trust you on this. You are in a position when you have all the information from your perspective that your perspective is going to be valued. We're going to run with your idea. And if they're not comfortable with this, if the sense of ownership, then the second thing you can do is to slowly shift that sense of ownership to them over time. Give them authority and ownership in little bits and chunks. So it may be they're so used to being told what to do. Instead, you say, well, you come up with some ideas and solutions, and we'll review them, and then we'll work together to figure out which ones are the right ones. Next time they come in, now you've come up with solutions. Now pick one and have a recommendation. The next time is, again, you can see the row. Not just pick one, but take the first steps and see how it goes, and we can review those actions. And as over time they become more comfortable with having agency, you'll have to do less and less oversight, and it's more about it's exceptions when they can come to you and say, I want to get your feedback. I want to get in a second opinion. And then I think the last area to create agency is probably the hardest for many leaders, and that is to forgive and to learn from failure. This is the hardest thing I find organizations having to do, because there is such an imperative and value put onto doing things perfectly. And yet we know things are never perfect. So this is one of the most important things to be able to do, is to set the expectations for yourself as a leader, to be vulnerable in that imperfection, and to tolerate and to expect that people will make mistakes, that they will learn from those, and therefore get greater confidence and confidence in their ability to create change. So I want to take another moment to say hello for more people who have joined. Let's see, we have Navneet coming in from India. So glad you could join us. Thank you so much. We have Soto from Athens. Melinda, thank you for sharing this, that a lot of times the beliefs that we have, that we adopt, are coming from our parents and from the people around you. And that is so true. We tend to have beliefs that are formed very, very early, because our family, our parents are the people who are most influential at early points in our lives. And so our outlook of the world, how we perceive the world and how we move through it, come from our parents. That said, it doesn't have to always stay that way. We are informed by so many other places. And if we understand and see that certain beliefs are holding us back, then it is incumbent upon us to change those too as well. And Eduardo, thank you so much for joining. Thank you for the kudos about the book. I'm so glad that you're finding value in it too as well. We have Vlad coming in from Romania. And Vlad shares, it's hard to trust people who take decisions without taking into account the information received from the field team. I think that is such a strong point to be made, that it's oftentimes when you're in the field and you're sending information in and it feels like it's being ignored. This is where that openness belief is so valuable, because instead of sending your data and insights into the dark void of the organization, you're putting it out into the open. You can see who's seeing it. You can see comments from people who are responding saying, that's a really good point. We had never seen that before. Let's take into account what's happening with that. And then you can see from the decision making how that was taken into account and why they accepted it or did not accept it. But that creates, again, that sense of trust throughout the organization. So thank you so much for sharing that. Let's see, we have a couple other people. Abiola, thank you for joining from Nigeria. Ala, thank you for joining. We have Ibrahim coming in from Somalia, and Rabi from Morocco, and Ellen from Austin. Thank you so much for joining. I have this comment from Charles that if you're responsible for certain projects or information, it is your job to make change within the company. That's so true. Yet you need feedback and approval from peers if they give you the tools for the betterment of all. This is, again, thank you, Charles, for pointing that out, that it's not just you and your project going forward on a single track. Having that belief of openness, having the ability to bring in more information, more diverse opinions to help you along that journey is a very important part of being a disruptive leader. Let's see, we have Mark coming in from Kenya. Again, thank you for joining, and I'm glad you're finding this to be helpful. Tariq from Egypt, and Elias coming from Canada. Love Canada. My husband's Canadian, my kids are Canadian, so definitely have a soft spot for Canada. And then we have Professor Santwani from India. So I have a question from Siju from India. How do you think you can make your idea, which would be disruptive to normal people, influence a group when you know for sure that the team rests for a very basic one? How do you personally sell an idea that is going to be disruptive, I think is the point here. And I fundamentally believe that disruption centers on the ability to look to the future, and in particular, to identify a very clear future customer and then bring them back into the organization. It can't be about market share. It can't be about technology. It has to be unifying your entire team around a particular customer need that is so compelling. You can't help but run towards that customer. And it is incumbent on the person trying to create that change. It's incumbent on you as a disruptive leader to focus and create that vision of who that future customer is. Paint it really vividly so that need is so compelling that people would want to run towards it. And then let's go on to the last belief, because I want to get that in. And that is the belief of action, which is working at the speed of opportunities. And in particular, the opportunities created by those future customers. And what happens in disruptive organizations is they look at the world really differently. They look at change and upheaval as a normal course of every day. They think it's normal, they think it's manageable, and it's part of the daily routine. And one of the things they do is they put a skeleton plan together and then put a premium on making decisions and taking actions very quickly. It's not about taking risky decisions. It's about taking calculated risks, knowing that there's a trade-off between having a perfect solution and speed. And they do a couple things. This belief, first of all, embraces done rather than trying to do perfect. Done is better than perfect. Another thing is that there's a belief that we're going to test and frankly fail our way to success. The only way we're going to know if something works is if you actually put it in the field. And when you put it into the field, you know one of two things is going to happen. It's going to work or it's not going to work. Both are acceptable. Because when you know that something isn't working, then you can go back and do the other thing. But you're better off figuring that out sooner than later. And then finally, what I love is that disruptive organizations set up impossible deadlines. They set up and very clearly define what the next step and the next deadline is, and they make that time really, really short. So one of my favorite examples of this is coming from Southern New Hampshire University. One of the things that SNHU did was they had an opportunity to acquire a nearby university, Daniel Webster College. And they got called by the U.S. Education Department saying their certification just got withdrawn. Here's an opportunity, but you have 5 days to do this. But in 5 days, we're going to have to close the whole thing down. Do you want to take advantage of this opportunity? Now, I can't think of many organizations that can do and activate on that short of a notice, let alone a nonprofit educational institution. But that is exactly what they did. And the reason they were able to do this is that they were structurally prepared to do this. They had begun integrating more and more of the operations and decision-making around the organization into a centralized area. And because they had strong openness and agency beliefs, they were able to act extremely quickly in a very decentralized way to make sure that all the different departments agreed with this decision moving forward. It took them less than 24 hours to get on campus with a big list to go through, a due diligence list. It took another 24 hours to have all that information in hand out to the department so everybody could have an input into that decision. And then another 24 hours, 3 days, they had the decision in hand and gave the acquisition proposal to Daniel Webster with 2 days to spare. So I look at examples like that. And I guess the question for you is, do you have a belief that when opportunities come your way, do you believe that you and your organization can exercise that level of action that quickly to be able to take advantage of these opportunities? Because you never know when they're going to come, and you need to be prepared to be able to act on them. So to give some very concrete things that you can do. The first thing to do is to measure and increase your capacity to change. Find out in your organization and test where are the places where there is resistance to change, and really focus on those areas. This is less about making sure that you have some small group of people who can change very quickly, but really looking at those pockets where there is a big resistance to change and focus on them. And the best way I know how to do that is back to the questions that Shiju asked, is how do you get people to change? And that is to put your future customer, put the reason for why you want that change to happen right square in the middle of that organization. Get more information about data. put a more focus on the decision-making processes. Make sure that that's more open. Create a sense of agency, and then see if that's making a difference in the ability for people to be able to take actions in a more confident and quick way. The second thing I would say is to define the decision field. And what I mean by that, it's very hard for people to take action when the whole world is available to them to take action. Instead, narrow it down to a very small space. Say that if they're not used to making a lot of decisions very quickly, then make the decisions really small, something that's manageable, and clearly define what that looks like. And as long as they stay within that field, as long as it's very clear that the calculated risk inside of that area is fine to take, then let them make decisions within that field. So one of the best ways to encourage this belief of action is to make sure that the decisions are very clear and to build that muscle memory and ability to make decisions quickly. The third area is my favorite, and that is to force decisions and actions with an impossible deadline. And it's one thing to say, okay, how much time do you need to make a decision? That's almost like asking, oh, how comfortable do you need to be? 100% comfortable? Then we'll give you 100% of that time. I think that's the worst thing you could do to create this sense of action and a bias for action. This belief really needs constraints on it. And if the constraints aren't created by the sense of urgency with your customers moving further and further away from you, then you need to create an artificial sense of urgency. So set an impossible deadline, knowing that they could never get all of the information, be 100% comfortable. Maybe they get to 80% of that comfortable, and then they have to make decisions. You come into a meeting with an expectation that a decision will be made. And it has a forcing function, first of all, of creating this greater comfort level with being uncomfortable. And second of all, it just moves you faster through this entire process. So I think my takeaway here again today is that go and take a look at the beliefs that are in your organization, the beliefs that are holding you back from being able to move forward and create change and disruption. And think about new beliefs that could be really helpful, like openness, agency, and a bias for action. If you're wanting to know how to actually do this, I encourage you to sit down with your team, take some sticky notes virtually, again, if you're not able to be in person, and have a discussion. What are the beliefs that are holding you back? And then write them down and then share them together and agree that the beliefs that you agree, these are not things that we should be saying to ourselves. Don't say them to yourselves anymore. Don't agree to say those things. Agree instead that we're not going to believe these things and we're not going to behave as if those beliefs are true. Instead, we're going to act in a very different way. And when you can identify those beliefs and agree as a team, as a leadership group, that we are going to move forward from here, that is the beginning of a change in your culture. So I want to close up by just saying thank you again for people who are watching. I love Laura Berlin's comment here. Creating safety and belonging allows people to open up and trust. Laura, thank you so much for adding that, because I think all of this comes down to you cannot create change. You cannot create disruption if people do not feel safe, if they do not feel that they are included and that they belong. As long as people have this belief that they cannot stand up and raise their hand and stick their neck out and advocate for a change, then they're not going to do it. Just a couple last hellos to Sachin coming in from Vijayawada, and then also Sivan coming from Burkina Faso. So great of you to join. At this point, I'm going to end the broadcast and thank you again so much. And I wish you all the best for changing those beliefs that are holding you back. All the best to you on your journey. Thanks.